As CEO and chairman of IBM, I got to meet such great people and learn so many great things. I'm going to let everybody else see a little bit about the real people that I know.
So now let's do that. Let's talk about the future. We'll wrap on a segment on the future. So look, Pepsi for many years, you were both part of and ran Pepsi. So when you just think, I'm on very generally, you kind of think about the trends that are going to change the future. You talked about the ones that changed your life. What do you see changing as we go forward, either live or work? What changes?
I think in the next 18 months, Ginni, we're going to have a massive series of experiments being done on what is the ideal future of work. Is it all hybrid? Is it all from the office? Is it a mix of both? Is it from co-working centers? Are people going to come by work group? How is this going to work? And how do we make sure we don't create two classes of citizens? One class is people who come to work, one that don't, or the office workers who have a choice versus the factory worker that doesn't have a choice because they have to come to work every day. So we're going to go through a period of experimentation to figure out what is the best future for work. And we haven't even measured productivity gains or improvements if people work remotely. So there's a lot of thinking that has to be done. So that's the first part. The whole change is going to happen in terms of how and where people work from. I think the second is technology is going to upend everything that we know. There isn't one part of life that's going to remain the same. I can guarantee you in a year, this Zoom is going to sound and look remote. Look old. Technology will evolve to a point where even Zoom will start to take a life of its own. So I think technology is changing so many things we know about life. The challenge for us is going to be how do we keep up with these changes? Because every aspect of our life is becoming upended, some for the better, some for the not so better. And the thing that worries me the most is how do we put the human back in humanity? Technology is making us think about humans differently. When I went back to face-to-face meetings with people, I just love shaking hands and giving people a hug, which we all hadn't done much of during COVID. And so I think how we put the human back in humanity, how we put families at the center of future of work, how we think about the whole workday differently and the workforce and the workplace differently, are going to be issues that consume us, absolutely consume us. And we're going to have to do all this thinking with a changing geopolitical environment where we're going from the world is flat to national boundaries being erected. We're going to go to multiple technology standards, maybe, who knows? Yeah. We're going to have to deal with multiple conflicts. And we're going to have to deal with divisions in our own country. And so I think we're going into a period of tremendous uncertainty. So if you're one of these, the cup is half full types, you say, hey, so many opportunities for somebody to come in and do something radically different for the better. I'm a half full person. So I think there's lots of opportunities everywhere you turn.
Yeah, well, you summarized almost all of them there, right? And I do think this idea about how work now, yes, experimentation will be needed for two reasons. One is that, during COVID, it's a crisis. So people do work different in a crisis than when, now that as crisis abates and it becomes a long term, we'll see how productivity sorts itself out, right?
Right.
And I think kind of to me the word is co-create, because I think you will sort of shape this and see where this goes over time. And it is in the backdrop of all that divisiveness that you were describing everywhere. So more human would help that actually, right?
I agree with you, Ginni. We should try to put that back in. Put the human back in.
Well, so speaking of what to put back in, how about comments, because you say this in the book a lot, and I happen to agree, this point about that an economy could unlock its potential if it had more women at their full potential and working. So what would you advise anyone listening, especially the pandemic, has set a number of women back?
I think I would sit back and say talent is our single biggest competitive advantage. And talent means drawing the best talent from the entire workforce, not from only half the workforce. So if you start off by saying, I need the best talent from the entire workforce, not just excluding parts of the workforce because of different gender or ethnicity, you'll end up with a very different makeup of employees. And you need that because at the end of the day, especially for knowledge companies, talent is everything for that. We have to draw from the best and the brightest. So if men in power don't come to the table and make it easier for young women to engage in these jobs. At the same time, build families, we'll have a crisis in our hands. So I think if we think like economists, this should be no-brainers. And I urge men in power in particular to think like economists.
That's an interesting point about thinking like an economist. That's a good analogy, because this idea, it's not being, you're not saying something that's negative to say that you need another generation to take care of the older generation.
That's right, exactly right.
I mean, every country has this issue, and they get into trouble when there's not, when there's more retired than working people, right? And that's what you have to address. And I know, I feel strongly on this. One solution is this idea of skills first, that hire people for skills, not just degrees, and you'll pull more people into the workforce who are actually quite talented at it, right? That are out there.
In fact, I'd say, Ginni, we should study, and maybe you're doing that already because you're so vested in education. I think we should study to understand what skills do high school students need to have to make them re-skillable downstream.
Yes.
Because we're going to constantly have to reskill our workforce.
Yeah, Indra, this, again, we could do a whole podcast, and we should on this, doing writing on this topic, that it's lifelong learning for everyone, because that same disruption you talked about earlier, if you're in tech, the half-life of a skill is like 3 to 5 years. So
I agree with you,
you can't be in tech if you don't like to learn. And that's soon going to be every job has that intersection. And so now,
almost learn and reinvent yourself.
And so think about government programs that think that you should go to school full-time to get aid, as an example. Well, that can't be anymore. And you'll have to go back over your lifetime. And so if you really think, I don't think it's that hard to solve. We just have to think that that's the goal. And then there's programs to change to make that happen, and just change paradigms that we're no longer once and done. I mean, history is a funny thing. You go back and look, there was a time when Americans did not have high school degrees. Americans did not have college degrees. And by the way, only 40% have a college degree today. So there are things that change that, laws that put in place, et cetera. We just have to do the same again now for a different world. So to that point, would you, when you think about, if you were running a company again right now, what would be a talent sort of policy that you'd put in place to make a difference?
I would actually put together systems and oversight to make sure that my employees are getting remedial coursework, lifelong learning, and don't make it an option. Because for their sakes, if they don't engage and relearn skills, they will become quite redundant. And I don't want that. So I'd literally force it. But the way I would do is I come up with interesting learning methods that make all this new learning exciting and fun, as opposed to sitting in front of the computer and answering questions. So I'd figure out how to make it fun. But I would make lifelong learning the core pillar of all people development.